Why is the French so poor? The image you are watching is split into two parts. You must have noticed that the top one is the opening ceremony of the 2018 Beijing Olympics, and the bottom one is the 2024 Olympics that just opened in Paris. Be happy, because you might only have to watch it in this clip. Because never before in history has a video of an opening ceremony been mercilessly deleted by the official Olympic YouTube channel. Besides the many uncertainties surrounding the Olympics taking place in the capital of China, from the athletes' belongings flying away, the Olympic flag being hung upside down, the power outage in the City of Light in the middle of the Olympics, and the constant protests. The Paris Olympics are being commented as being like a miniature version of France now. Chaotic, and in which the biggest cause comes from the stagnant economy. But why exactly is France so troubled? It's no secret that France is one of the most successful economies in history. More than any other country in the world, French workers are famous for demanding exactly what they want in unimaginable ways. Yet this very fact has left France with an uncertain present and future. The French economy is in trouble, and the government has adopted austerity policies that have led to cuts in areas of European pride, including energy transition and the environment. Before that, France had already reduced its budget for education, justice, defense, and regional development. To understand why, let's go back to the beginning. The Industrial Revolution. It is widely known that it was one of the most important things that ever happened to humanity. In just a few centuries, machines and advanced technology transformed societies around the world from being primarily farmers to being consumer societies. Before these machines, economies were almost entirely based on land and labor. The only way to grow an empire was to have a lot of land to farm and a lot of people to farm it. But with the advent of machines and technology, those who owned and developed them could become richer than any land-owning monarch. That's the story in most countries. But France is a little different. Although it was one of the first countries to embrace the Industrial Revolution, it took a much slower time to do so than its European rivals. Historians say that this was because France was preoccupied with its own revolution in the early decades of the Industrial Revolution and was then at the center of several regional wars. This slowed down the pace of innovation. Furthermore, France suffered from the influx of skilled workers that preceded the Industrial Revolution. They were mainly Protestants fleeing religious persecution. But among them were many mechanics, engineers in general, workers who were much needed in a country that wanted to build steam engines and mechanized factories. This can be counted as one of the first brain drains in history that still affects France today. As a result, while other European countries were beginning to form modern economies dominated by large corporations and huge industrial empires, France's economy remained largely a small craft industry. The upside was that while workers in other industrial economies were often literally squeezed out by factories, French workers were fairly equal, or even superior, to factory owners because there were still many smaller factories around. Imagine if there was just one or a few companies dominating an industry. What would you call it? A monopoly, right? That company could raise prices or lower standards for workers at will, and the workers couldn't do anything about it because they had nowhere else to go. On the other hand, if there are many small businesses competing for customers and workers, the situation is different. That is what happened in France during the Industrial Revolution. The French economy grew more slowly than other European powers with concentrated industrial centers. But in return, the French pride themselves on having a more egalitarian culture. The price to pay is that French industry has always been less productive than countries like Germany, Britain, and especially the United States. For a long time, France has sacrificed economic output to be more balanced, focusing more on improving working conditions and protecting workers' rights. The pension system is good and French workers have been quite content. In fact, it has been throughout much of post-World War II modern France. Any attempt to challenge it has been met with some kind of resistance. But what do we say? It should have been when the Nazis occupied the country in 1940, except that France raised the white flag so easily. All of this builds up to another extremely important element of the French economy: strong government intervention. Of course, France has been a capitalist economy for the past 2 centuries, but at that time it was influenced by the free market in some areas, and the government was heavily involved in certain industries. We said earlier that many competing companies can be good for workers, but an economy with some large corporations is also good. because small companies cannot compare with them in terms of scale of operations. After World War II, France realized this weakness, and the government actively solved it by saying, the country does not have large corporations, so let us do it ourselves. It was called a command economy, where the government directed the economy by establishing industries it deemed important, but welcomed private sector development, or if it did exist, competition with the state sector. The government created state-owned enterprises such as the National Bank, the National Highway Service, the national airline Air France, and even Minitel. It was sort of like the internet, before the internet. State-owned companies are funded by the government because the country needs organizations that provide important services on a large scale. After all, people can't fly if there are only 10 people on the airline, right? The small difference between private companies and state-owned companies is that if you are private, you have to consider everything to cover your costs of production. You have to worry about supply and demand. The government also provides goods and services to consumers, but they don't make money by selling goods and services. They make money by taxing people. It is an efficient way to provide goods and services that are not easily traded, such as defense, emergency services, police, or the entire justice system. It is difficult for individuals to voluntarily pay for these services because they are more about collective efficiency. In simple terms, the agency is the sales and marketing arm of the government, and the fashion shaker is the punishment for those who do not contribute their share to society. While the private sector will look for ways to cut costs, such as by reducing the number of employees, state-owned enterprises may find reasons to hire more people because the government needs high employment figures. Or they may be tasked with producing goods and services that are not economically profitable. For example, the national airline flies low-demand routes. In fact, most countries around the world do this in one way or another. Even in the United States, which has no national airline, there are programs that pay private airlines to fly routes that are less in demand. In France, however, this system is taken to an extreme, with an overemphasis on state-owned enterprises that once again puts the economy behind. One of the side effects of having so many state-owned enterprises is that it can push up inflation. When workers can easily find jobs at large state-owned companies that want to hire as many people as possible, unemployment falls. Normally that's a good thing, but too much of a good thing can be toxic. The truth is that economies need unemployment. In advanced economies, the natural rate of unemployment is around 2 to 3%. Anything lower than that would cause inflation. Well, if more people work, households will have more income. That means more people will have more money, which will create more aggregate demand for everything in the economy. If companies want to hire workers, they will have a hard time because there are fewer people looking for work. Companies will have to offer higher wages to attract people who already have jobs to their place. If all companies do this, they will be forced to raise prices to maintain profits. That means people will demand higher wages to keep up with inflation. So companies raise prices, creating a vicious cycle called a wage price spiral. But this doesn't necessarily happen if workers' pay increases match workers' productivity. Imagine if wages rose faster than what was produced, people would have more money to chase after fewer goods, and that's inflation. That is exactly what happened in France. Since the 1980s, the government has been trying to fix this. But now it is forced to face the harsh reality that its workers are demanding a standard of living that their productive capacity cannot provide. Benefits like generous retirement plans, flexible working hours, and strong worker protections mean companies have lost their global competitive edge after decades of government protection. France's population is also aging, meaning younger workers must be more productive to make up for a growing number of older workers. And everyone wants a generous pension. On the one hand, the government tries to ensure retirement by doubling taxes and intervening more deeply in the economy. But when faced with problems with the European Union, which always demands free trade between member states, France can only watch helplessly as its remaining young workforce leaves, and it is hard to blame them because they can earn more money in places like Germany, the UK, and especially the US. That is why France is one of the most advanced economies with the highest levels of intellectual migration. But if France were to eliminate traditional worker benefits and increase the competitiveness of its economy, it would face angry workers who would feel betrayed and deprived of their right to retire at 55 with generous pensions. Not only that, French workers would even have one less reason to stay in their country of birth. Even as France tries to compensate for its labor shortage with immigration, it creates equally serious socio-economic problems. France is trying to increase overall productivity while desperately cutting back on systems that make its economy less competitive. But the truth is that the country has been living beyond its means for far too long. It offers its workers plenty of protection and a good quality of life. That's something many countries could learn from. But now France is being overtaken by economies that are willing to work harder. In this difficult situation, France tried to organize the cheapest Olympics in history in the hope of creating momentum for the economy. However, with what the Paris Olympics are showing, people cannot help but wonder if the country that was once the most beautiful, intelligent, and considered the most elegant on the planet has fallen into an irreversible decline.